Konnichiwa. Hello, my name is Adam Shook, and I'm a software engineer from Sydney office. And today I will be talking to you about AJAX with the Google Web Toolkit. Today's topics. First, I'll start with talking about AJAX and what the potential of AJAX is. Then I'll talk about how Google Web Toolkit brings software engineering to AJAX. Our approach on focusing on the user and all else will follow. We believe that fast is better than slow. And then we'll have a wrap-up, talk about the various pieces of Google Web Toolkit, followed by questions and answers. Let's talk about where the web is today. Today, browsers are treated like dumb HTML terminals. Everything is an HTTP round trip and a history entry. So every time you do anything on a web page, an entirely new HTML page is rendered. What this means is every page is slow, and you get disconnected, and you forget where you are, and basically just a very slow, painful web experience. So, what is AJAX? Well, most of you are probably quite familiar with AJAX. Let's talk about the architectural shift that AJAX brings us. At the top of this diagram, you see what traditional HTML applications look like. You'll see in this diagram a stateless HTML browser, and every user action requires a totally new page to be rendered. And this is a lot of work for this poor server here, and you can see the server is very tired from all the work. Compare this with AJAX development. So with AJAX, the browser does the work. You can have a stateful JavaScript and DHTML browser, and the events are handled locally, and only when new information is needed, when something involving the server is done, is a remote procedure call sent to the server, and only data gets sent back to the user. So you end up with a stateless server. So a lot less work is required for the server, meaning you pay a lot less money for bandwidth, hosting, CPU, etc. So how does one typically fall into using AJAX when they develop? Well, the slippery slope of AJAX development. You're used to, as a web developer, writing an HTML web page, and you experiment. You play around, you add a little bit of script to your web page, and perhaps you have a flashy button, talks to a server, just a little experiment. And before you know it, everybody loves it. They want more. The salespeople start selling features to other clients that you don't even know how to build yet. And before you know it, you're an AJAX shop. Everything you do, you're developing with AJAX. Then one day, your company says, actually, we need to sell a web page to a company that needs more than just Internet Explorer. So you attempt to port to some other browser besides Internet Explorer, say Safari or Firefox. And you realize this is actually quite hard. Before you know it, you hate the browser with all of your heart, and you quit your job due to the intolerable spaghetti that you've been writing. It's just a mess. This is the typical slippery slope of AJAX development. You start playing around, before you know it, very hard. So to be crystal clear, the very simplicity and flexibility that makes JavaScript attractive for small amounts of code makes it especially bad for large amounts of code. You've probably seen today a lot of demos with small snippets of code using JavaScript, and that works wonderfully, but for large amounts of code, you need a much more powerful tool. So it's very easy to slip into making a poorly planned investment in AJAX. And you'll end up living with the consequences for a very long time. here comes Google Web Toolkit. So what is Google Web Toolkit, which we call GWT for short? So Google Web Toolkit allows you to build AJAX applications with Java technology. So instead of coding directly in JavaScript, write your client-side code in Java using your Java IDE and Java tools, and you can even debug your code in your favorite IDE. Now, what makes GWT interesting is that you may think I'm just talking about applets running inside your browser, but I'm not. GWT actually includes a cross-compiler that converts your Java code into optimized, standalone JavaScript that you can deploy to any browser from any server. The target browser doesn't require Java Virtual Machine, no plugins. All that we have here is JavaScript, simple JavaScript. Now, you may be getting the impression that GWT is just a compiler, but GWT is so much more than that. That's just one part of it. Another part of GWT is that you can debug directly as Java in a Java debugger. This is called hosted mode, and it's best explained with a demonstration. What you're looking at here is the hello world of Google Web Toolkit. So every piece of technology, every language has to have hello world. And this is the simplest piece of Google Web Toolkit code. And you'll see here, in standard Java development, you'd have a main class, whereas for Google Web Toolkit, we have a class which implements the entry point interface and provides an on-module load method. And all this code will do, we'll add a button with the text "click me," and when it's clicked, a window will alert "Hello AJAX." So this probably looks familiar to those of you who've done JavaScript. Alert. Let's have a look at this. So you'll notice here I'm using Eclipse. I'm not using a text editor. I'm using a really powerful programming tool. You don't have to use Eclipse, however. You can use your favorite Java IDE. So you can use whatever you want. You can even use TextPad or Notepad if that's what you want to use. And you'll see here, here's the code. And you've got all of your favorite features from an IDE. Watch, I have autocomplete of methods. Anyone who's been developing in JavaScript, you probably missed this feature. And let's run this application. So I just click debug, and what you're looking at here is hosted mode. So this here is the real Safari browser talking to our real Java bytecode. And when I click this button, as the code suggested, an alert. Now, hosted mode, where it really becomes useful is when something goes wrong. And this happens a lot when you're developing in AJAX. So let's show off your usual debugging tools that you'd be used to if you've developed in Java. So I can set a breakpoint in my source code. And so when I click this button, a breakpoint will get triggered. So let's watch. I'm going to click 3, 2, 1. Breakpoint, as you'd expect. And notice I have everything I want. I have the stack trace, the methods. I can look at the sender, and this is what it looks like as HTML. And I can step through my code, everything that you can do with Java. And now I continue, and an alert popped up, hello AJAX, as you'd expect. So this allows for a really quick cycle of write your code, edit your code, and then test it. So let's actually change the code. So a common request that we get is when people are developing web applications, they like to be able to type some code, click refresh, and see the change, and then keep typing, clicking refresh. Well, you can do the same with Google Web Toolkit. So let's, as an example, let's use the refactoring tools that you don't get in Notepad, you get in a fancy IDE. So let's use refactor and extract this constant. Let's call it that. Hello. And I'll change the text, hello Yokohama. And now if I go back to the hosted mode, I click refresh, I click the button, and look, it's been updated. So you see what I'm getting at here, that you can change your code, refresh, test, and really make changes, make fixes very quickly, a lot quicker than you'd be used to with typical JavaScript development. And I'd just like to mention that when you're developing in JavaScript, there are great tools such as Firebug and Venkman. And these tools, they really are very good, but they only work for Firefox. So if you want to test your application in Internet Explorer or Safari, you don't really have good tools. You can't just use the same tool. Whereas Google Web Toolkit lets you do that. So this was Java code in a browser. So if I click this button here, compile browse, this actually generates the raw JavaScript that you would actually deploy to your server. And you'll notice here, it just finished compiling. This is the usual Safari you're used to. And it's just a plain HTML file. I click the button, as you'd expect. And you're probably wondering what the source looks like. Well, most of it, it's hidden away from us. So there's complex compiled JavaScript code, but you shouldn't need to debug the JavaScript. And this is where the magic happens. We just include the JavaScript file. Okay, so that is Hello World for Google Web Toolkit. I mentioned that this allows for us to have a rapid iteration cycle. So Google Web Toolkit brings software engineering to AJAX. You can use any Java IDE, or if you think you're really good, you don't need an IDE at all. And you have a rapid edit, test, debug, refactor cycle. Also, Google Web Toolkit, because it's Java, you have JUnit for unit tests. You get reuse of code through jars, so you can bundle up widgets, etc. You can use object-oriented design patterns, which are really helpful for designing large-scale applications. Also, JavaDoc, so a powerful documentation tool in Java. And what I think is the most important feature of all of this, which is compile time errors. So compile time errors, you don't miss them until they're gone. And to give you an example, let me go back to this code here. So anybody who's developed in JavaScript, if you've ever made a spelling mistake, you probably only find out about this when you actually run the application. Well, because it's Java, you get a compile time error. So it's really important to pick up your errors as early as possible. And you can't do much earlier than compile time. So you'll make a lot less mistakes. Let's talk about what GWT is trying to achieve, the GWT mission. GWT believes it's important to focus on the user and all else will follow. The stated goal is to radically improve the web experience for users by enabling developers to use existing Java tools to build no-compromise AJAX for any modern browser. So you see here, we put users first, not developers. And I'm sorry to say that, but we feel it's very important that Google Web Toolkit can make powerful, fast, useful, usable applications. That's the top priority of Google Web Toolkit. And by no compromise, we mean anything you can do with normal JavaScript AJAX development, you can do in Google Web Toolkit. Then a very close second, the developers. So we try and make as many tools, make it as easy for the developers to do what they need to do. And we're not nearly as interested in gee whiz technology, flashy bells, whistles, lights. Anyone can develop that, but that's not the goal of Git. So if you share this philosophy, this perspective with us, then you'll like Git. As a developer of a web application, it's very important to maintain the web usability fundamentals. Let's not reteach users how to use the web. The goal is to focus on the basics, and we prefer using native UI elements. So basic DOM, your usual button input, instead of complicated widgets. We support keyboard-only use. We honor font size preferences. So if someone doesn't see so well, they can enlarge or shrink. And the user is in control of the browser at all times. Speed is vital, especially at startup. It's very important that your application loads very quickly. And the ideal is it just feels like a traditional web application, just better. Let's talk about one of those fundamentals of usability, history. Have you ever seen the following? A website that says, "Please do not hit your reload button. We are requesting authorization to charge your credit card, and if you press reload, your credit card may be charged twice." I take it many of you have seen this and you found it very frustrating. So what happens if you click reload accidentally? What do you do? What happens if your internet connection dropped out? What if these are tickets to a show that you really, really want and you're not sure? So that's one example of what we think we can do better with AJAX. Also, do not click the back button. So this is an actual website we found, which has a giant message which says, "Please do not use your browser's back button." Once again, AJAX can do this better. Browser history. So Git provides a simple history API. You can listen to history events by implementing this interface. You can create history events, and history tokens form the basis of linkable URLs. So history tokens, you can see here we have a hash in the URL and it says settings. This is a common convention in AJAX applications. And if you go to this URL, it would then take you to the settings page within your application. And the Git included hyperlink class automatically adds history entries. So I'll give you an example of this in action a bit later on. Another fundamental of web development is localized messages. You want your application to not just work in one language. So Google Web Toolkit provides an efficient way to do internationalization. You use interfaces to define type-safe template methods, and you can see here an access denied message, which takes an error code and a username. Then somebody else creates the corresponding localized properties file. So this doesn't need to be anyone technical. Error. And there's a template placeholder for the error code, the username, cannot access, and then the file name. And then in the code, you bind the data with code using compile time code generation. So this is all you need to do from the code. You call your message with the parameters you want to pass. And you'll notice there was actually a mistake here, that the message takes 2 parameters, but the properties file contains 3 parameters. There's also a file which was not in the message. And this is really great. Google Web Toolkit would not let this compile. So if you did this in traditional JavaScript development, you'd find out when you run the program that there's a bug, whereas Google Web Toolkit picks it up immediately. Also, styling with CSS is very important. Google Web Toolkit believes in separating the code from the presentation. So widgets publish CSS style names. You'll see here a list box publishes this CSS style name. And then you write a CSS rule which matches that. So this facilitates loose coupling between the CSS and the code. Separation of presentation and code. So you probably want to see some really cool demos of what Google Web Toolkit can do. The first demo I'd like to show, which illustrates usability without sacrificing speed, is the kitchen sink demo. This demo has a very fast startup time and small script size, and it uses client-side MVC, Model View Controller, and on-the-fly UI creation. So the widgets are created only when they're used, and they're not created more than once. So if you switch around, it uses the same memory. It has a web-native look and feel. The controls has history and it has bookmarks. So let's switch to this example now. So this is the kitchen sink sample, and this is freely available on the web. This URL will work for you as well. And you'll see here we have some basic widgets, things that you would expect in any UI framework. So we have drop-downs, buttons, checkboxes, we have panels, and as I mentioned before, we preserve the text size if the user wishes to change the text size. So you'll notice it didn't go all funny, the text didn't go in random directions. We also have lists. So I have a suggest box here. So we have autocomplete. So this is just like Google Suggest. And tree widgets. There's a rich text editor. So you don't need to write one yourself. Make that red. And we also have pop-ups. So you can show the pop-up, and also we have dialog boxes. And we love showing off this photo. This is a member of the Google Web Toolkit team, and this man here is former American President Jimmy Carter. And the next photo we can't show you, which is the Secret Service dragging this man away. Now, before I go on, I mentioned I would show you an example of history in Google Web Toolkit. If you were paying close attention, you will have noticed up the top the hash was changing. So if I click on panels, it now says panels, whereas if I click on pop-ups, it changes the hash in the URL, which means that if I go back and forth in the browser, it's going through my history. And you'll see the information wasn't lost. So the quick brown fox, still there. All done for you. And I can take this URL, and I can even paste it in a new tab or bookmark it, send it to a friend, and it opens to the exact place I had it. So that's history taken care of by Google Web Toolkit. The other example I would like to show you was not made by Google. It was made by a company called Lombardi Software, and they created Lombardi Blueprint, which is high-power, collaborative business process management tool. And to quote their senior director of marketing, he said, "We needed the user's experience to be fast, highly interactive, and easy enough to use by any business user." Let's have a look at it. So it looks like any AJAX website, but wait until I log in. So this entire website was made with Google Web Toolkit. And try and think about some web applications you've seen, and then have a look at this. It's a standard diagramming tool, but very powerful. It looks more like a desktop application. And I can change the text. I can shuffle around. I can drill down. I can change to a process diagram. I can change the zoom. Very powerful tool. And it's very fast, you'll notice as well. People generally don't believe that you can make an application this fast. And I'll talk in a moment about how Google Web Toolkit gets your AJAX so fast. Firstly, you'll notice this slide has a lot of text on it. And I don't want you to pay too much attention to the individual text, but this is just a list of the comprehensive classes you get thrown in if you use Google Web Toolkit. We've got user interface widgets, as I showed you before in the kitchen sink example. We have client-server data exchange, quality and usability. So I mentioned internationalization, history, not to mention a lot of the JRE, the Java Runtime Environment classes, have been emulated, so they compile down to JavaScript. Let's talk about speed. We believe fast is better than slow. And you've probably never heard a user say to you, we want your AJAX application to be slower. No one ever complains when an application is too fast. Google Web Toolkit believes in no compromise speed. Speed is a critical component of usability. And making complex AJAX code work at all is hard enough. So if you're writing your AJAX by hand, will you have the opportunity to make it fast as well? We take speed very seriously, and Google Web Toolkit includes a benchmarking subsystem to help you fine-tune your application. And speed is very much designed into the GWT architecture. So your application, without much work, will already be fast. One of the ways we do this, 3 words, whole program optimization. When we compile your code down into JavaScript, the entire program can be analyzed, and dead code can be removed, methods can be inlined, a lot of improvements can be made to make your program faster and smaller. And notice I talk about faster and smaller as if they're both the same thing. Well, decreasing script size and increasing speed are complementary goals. The smaller your application, the faster it runs, because less download needs to happen. One of the techniques we use to get your application faster than it could be without Google Web Toolkit is we use optimized permutations. So you write a single Java code base as a developer, and your user wants to download exactly what they need in a single optimized, can't go wrong chunk of code. As a developer, you don't want to send Internet Explorer code to a Firefox user. You don't want to send debug code to a production user. It makes sense, but most AJAX code does this. So how do we avoid this? Well, we make one file, perhaps for Firefox 1 English American users, a separate file for Internet Explorer 6 UK, lots of different permutations and configurations. Opera 9 perhaps with Canadian French, and Safari. We can make all the permutations that are required, and the user downloads exactly what they need, nothing more. And then the user caches this file on the client until the sun explodes. Don't need to reload this file until the code is changed. So before I show you how this works, let me introduce you to JSNI. JSNI, or JavaScript Native Interface, allows you to implement native methods using JavaScript right within your Java Google Web Toolkit application. So you'll see here, this is a Java method, but within, this is JavaScript code. The way you signify this is you just write the word native, and then you can write a normal method. So this method flipName takes a string, returns a string, but is implemented in JavaScript. So this allows you to call back and forth from Java source to JavaScript. It's great for interop or hand tweaking script. So how do we use JSNI with optimized permutations? Well, we branch reality. We actually send different implementations for different users, for different browsers. So the standard abstract class DOM impl, the DOM manipulation class, has a method setInnerText. For Mozilla, perhaps the most efficient way to implement this is to use append child in the browser, whereas perhaps that's not as efficient in Internet Explorer. Perhaps InnerText is more efficient in Internet Explorer. So we have a separate implementation per browser. This is fantastic. It gives you independent, monolithic compiles. So your code, you don't need to worry about this. You just call impl.setInnerText, and magically, the Mozilla users will get the append child implementation, and the Internet Explorer users will get InnerText, all thrown in for free. So you'll see, we only send to the user exactly what they need and what is most efficient for them. Your typical AJAX setInnerText implementation today would go, if this browser, then do this. Else, if this is supported, do this. Whereas Google Web Toolkit allows you to jump straight to the most efficient implementation. This table shows the performance comparison. So a typical portable setInnerText method, which I just mentioned, if, else, if, would take this long in these browsers. Whereas Google Web Toolkit jumps straight to the most efficient implementation for that browser. So you'll see, perhaps in Safari and Opera, text content is the best way, whereas for Firefox and Internet Explorer, perhaps InnerText is the best way. The numbers here aren't the point. The point here is this concept is not possible with a standard JavaScript program. Google Web Toolkit enables something that you couldn't do otherwise. And you can see the performance improvements, much faster. So now I'm going to show you some quick diagrams just to illustrate performance improvements. A common question is, how big is Google Web Toolkit? How many kilobytes must my user download to get this Google Web Toolkit library? Well, the truth is, Google Web Toolkit is not so much a library, but rather you only pay for what you use. So if you don't use a framed, a pop-up panel, then you don't download it. So you'll see this chart shows the compiled script size in bytes, and we start off with an empty program and we add additional widgets, and the size gradually gets bigger, but as we add more widgets towards the end, not that much more additional cost, because a lot of the code is in common with the previous implementations. So we have a very smart compiler. Another improvement, better usability from less bandwidth. So how you move your traffic, your bits, to the user from the server matters. A traditional web page without AJAX, for each new page that is loaded, you have to load a whole new HTML page. And this was just taken using our simple, I believe it was the mail example. So with the GWT, the first time you have to download the full JavaScript code, but each additional action you take only downloads the new data, not a full web page. Now this is just the first run. Once it's cached in the browser, well, it's very, very fast, because the user only needs to download the data. And just some very quick comparisons. HTTP requests are a very common source of slowness in applications, and this just shows if you upgrade your version of GWT, your application is already magically better performance. So you don't need to do anything, just upgrade, and we're working on the problem. Similarly, the compiler, we're getting the size of your application smaller, so just by downloading a new application. And also a faster application is also just a download away. So a simple upgrade of Google Web Toolkit gives an improvement of your site's performance. And you can expect this to happen each new version. So I'm actually running out of time, and there's just not enough time to demo everything in Google Web Toolkit. There's so much. I haven't talked about unit tests, benchmarking, internationalization. We have automatic inclusion of external JavaScript and CSS files. There's perfect caching of compiled script, so your user doesn't need to download any more than they need to. I hinted at deferred binding earlier, which was the technique used to, at compile time, determine which implementation to use. And it's a unified approach to configuration and code generation. Automatically, everything is cross-browser. You'll see all of the big browsers are supported. You don't need to do much. We have Internet Explorer 6, 7, Firefox, etc. You can develop on whatever development environment you want, Mac, Linux, Windows, and I use Eclipse, but you don't have to. You can use IntelliJ, Eclipse, NetBeans, whatever Java development environment that you're used to. Google Web Toolkit is fully open source, which is great. It means that you can have a look at our code, and also we can work together to make Google Web Toolkit as powerful as it can possibly be. It's licensed under Apache 2.0, and the source is on Google Code. And there's good documentation on how to make GWT better. There's an open source contributors guide, a document on the spirit of GWT, including design axioms. And we have a fantastic community. We have over 13,000 members in the developer forum. We have over 750 members in the contributors forum. And many patches from outside Google were included in Google Web Toolkit 1.5. If you want to dive in, we've got great documentation. There's a getting started guide to help you write your very first Google Web Toolkit application. There's a widget gallery showing all the different UI widgets that I mentioned. We have a developer guide, and we also have a class reference. And there's a growing ecosystem around Google Web Toolkit. We have comprehensive IDE support. Major applications using Google Web Toolkit are in production or development, including Google products, Google Checkout, Health, Mashup Editor, Base. The next version of AdWords, which is a very big product for Google, will use Google Web Toolkit. And I demonstrated Blueprint, and there's many other non-Google projects. There's add-on libraries, books, articles, contributor forums, and a large and fast-growing developer base. Now, it's very important that you're all aware that a new version of Google Web Toolkit was just recently announced. Google Web Toolkit 1.5. The release candidate is now available for download. So what's new? Well, our most requested feature, Java 1.5 support. So all your favorite Java features, generics, enums, etc. The performance is much improved. So some people have seen, by upgrading, an improvement of between 20% to say even 2 times speed improvements, just by upgrading. We have new UI library, a simplified DOM API, internationalization improvements, bidirectional support, pluralization. There's accessibility support, and enhancements to the JRE emulation library. So what's coming next? Well, we're working on a few great things. We want to make it the best it can possibly be. there's out-of-process hosted mode. So what this is, you could develop on Linux and debug in Internet Explorer. It doesn't even need to be on the same computer. So this will make debugging very simple. There's also new widgets. We will allow for exporting of a JavaScript API. There will be an Eclipse plugin, and many, many more size and speed optimizations. And perhaps even your feature. Just a reminder that Google Web Toolkit, being open source, means that any one of you can add a feature to Google Web Toolkit. So that's Google Web Toolkit. Let me summarize. Google Web Toolkit, I first talked about AJAX and how you need leverage to use AJAX well with low risk. Formerly, you needed a PhD in browser quirks, and this is no longer a hiring prerequisite. Now, anyone with solid Java experience can develop AJAX. We turn AJAX into software engineering. So I mentioned, I demonstrated editing, debugging, testing, refactoring. All this is now possible. GWT rewards using good engineering practices, and we will share our best work and ideas with you, and we hope you will return the favor. So there's much more to come, and see you online. So before I take a few quick questions, just a reminder, please do check out the Google Code website. It has lots of documentation, lots of videos, samples, and the URL at the bottom of the page is the Google Web Toolkit documentation. And let me just show that. So we have Japanese documentation for Google Web Toolkit. Please do visit the URL. Please look at this information. And finally, before I take some questions, just a reminder to please fill out surveys for this talk. And also, if you don't have time to ask a question now, you can catch me at the social event downstairs later with your question. And please do ask questions, because I really would like you all to have a look at Google Web Toolkit. So thank you very much.